Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are in the middle of a critically important discussion of immigration policy in America. And you well know March 6th is one deadline, February 8th is another deadline. The 8th is the deadline to have some type of a budget deal or a CR, continuing resolution, or the government could potentially shut down again. But the real deadline has to do with DACA recipients, and the president gave until March the 5th as the actual deadline for Congress to come up with some kind of proposal that he could sign with respect to immigration, DACA, and so on. And the president has put forward an immigration stance that includes three important components, and those three are these: end of the visa lottery program, end to chain migration, and number three, a border wall. Now, where the rubber meets the road is this: some Christians see these three elements, these policies, in conflict with our biblical mandate to evangelize the world. In other words, if we keep potential individuals that could be evangelized out of our nation, even though they may pose a threat to our nation, if we keep them out, we prohibit a significant opportunity to fulfill our evangelism mandate. Now, Sam, I want to go to you because this is an argument that is being advanced in a strong way on social media. It's being advanced, I fear, from the pulpits of America. And so can you again underscore how a strong nationalist stance, which our president has and which we, just to be honest, agree with, is not in conflict in any way with our mandate to evangelize?
Dave, I can. This issue right now, as we know, as you just laid out so very well, has been a matter of controversy for a long time. About a year ago, we covered a program here where actually there were quote-unquote Christian organizations that were involved in relocation efforts for immigrants, if you recall. And there were those entities that were making a major case for why they were fulfilling God's purposes for them, they believed, in evangelism by bringing in individuals to this nation. And they cited verses of the Good Samaritan and the individual on the side of the road, and they cited the strangers from the Old Testament where God told Israel they needed to reach out and accept the stranger, and they used that as a point of saying this is a requirement for the church and this is what we are to do. And we covered that in real focus, and I summarized that by coming back to your question here. There again, back to where we're talking from. What's the purpose and the function of civil government? It's justice. It's protection of their people. It's praising those and protecting those who do well, who follow the law. And it's punishing those who break the law. Well, when it comes to strangers in the Old Testament, God never told Israel to accept in anybody from anywhere at any time. Matter of fact, in Isaiah chapter 1 and verse 9, God told Israel, because you did not follow my commands, and effectively you let in anybody, regardless of whether they wanted to assimilate and come to worship the God of heaven, or whether they were the enemy, the Assyrian, who wanted to come. You didn't make any distinction, and now you're sitting here, and God said, I'm going to allow the Assyrian, effectively, really the ISIS of the day, to burn your cities and ravage your land as a punishment for not understanding this principle. And that's where it comes down to. The word stranger, immigrant, two different categories. Those who want to come because they want to be a part of that nation. For Israel, the purpose was come, worship the God of heaven, participate in the blessings that God gave that land because they were doing what God said. The other stranger is the one who wanted to come, who was actually an enemy, never intending to assimilate, never wanting to be a part of the God of heaven. That is a fundamental biblical distinction, not understood by many, not even taught by many in churches. But if you don't understand that, Dave, you will not understand what's taking place here. The president, by doing these things, whether he knows those biblical texts I gave or not, I don't know. But what he is doing by guarding who comes in and making sure that who are there are legal and are wanting to be a part of who we are is biblical, and it's also very constitutional, and it is in every regard what the statutory law passed by Congress says he is supposed to do.
So, Sam, let me back up and make sure that I get this very, very clear from you. What you're saying unequivocally is this, that it is both biblical and constitutional, whether it's President Trump or anybody else that's the president of the country, for them to want to be somewhat suspicious of who comes into our country, not just welcome people in an unmitigated fashion. We have to know who's coming. We have to know the motivations for why they want to be here. And if they're coming not to assimilate into this nation, to support our Constitution, to live underneath our legal system, which is based on Judeo-Christian ethic, it is not unbiblical. It is not in conflict with our individual mandate from God to evangelize to say, sorry, you cannot be in our country.
Absolutely correct. And not only that, Dave, to not do that for the president in particular and Congress, for them not to do that, it's a violation of their oath, their covenant with the people when they take their oath. It's a violation of that, number one. And number two, it will be used by God to discipline the nation that disregards God's caution about who comes in. God says to be picky. He says to be careful about what happens because there are enemies of the truth and they're enemies of freedom. So yes, Dave, there's an aspect of God's judgment that's involved for a nation who disregards it. And there's also a matter of law that's violated if those in positions of authority violate the oath which they have promised to take.